The pandemic was tough too. But I think by the time I'd got to the pandemic, I was so exhausted and hadn't released this stress in a healthy way, that I just literally was crawling on my hands and knees to work daily,
Yeah.
as many teachers are, you know? And I think the problem is, or one of the problems is that is either considered a badge of honor. It's like, okay, look what I'm doing. I'm exhausted. I have flu. I'm sick. I've just had a loss in my family, but I'm still in the classroom, you know, and that's what's expected of us. And then there's the guilt that aligns with taking any time off, even time off that's owed to you, like, you know, PTO. It's like, well, how are you going to get the class prepared for when you leave? And, you know, it's almost more difficult to be out than it is to be in at times.
A few years ago, I started writing a fictitious story based on my time as an educator. It is called Taught, and the story was partially inspired out of anger and frustration fueled by burnout. Okay, actually, it was more than partially inspired by anger and frustration. But Taught has also become a vehicle for me to tell what I thought at the time, and in some ways continue to think, was and is the real story of teaching. I now realize that my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but there are some pieces of Taught that resonated with many educators. This podcast is an extension of that story, and I, a former teacher, will interview other educators asking them to share how they really feel about the current state of education. Why are so many teachers burn out? Why are so many, like me, leaving the field? We likely won't solve any problems or come up with any solutions, but we can create a community of voices that maybe begin the conversation around how educators can take back teaching. I'm Melissa LaFleur. Welcome to Taught, the podcast.
I like to be educated, but I'm so frustrated.
Hey, everybody. Today's guest comes to us with over 20 years of experience as a dedicated educator, school leader, and wellness coach. And now she specializes in helping teachers who feel overwhelmed, overworked, and riddled with self-doubt rediscover their purpose, reconnect with themselves, and cultivate empowered relationships, both inside and outside the classroom. That's going to be just about every teacher I know. So her motto and focus is empowering teachers to thrive, not just survive. Diestene Williams' journey began in 2006 as a teacher in London, where she faced a life-altering experience that shaped her commitment to resilience and teacher well-being. From leading schools in South Korea to navigating personal and professional challenges in the U.S., she has witnessed firsthand the transformative power of mindfulness, community, and intentional living. Now she has made her life's work helping educators on the transformative journey out of burnout. So, of course, she caught my attention. Diestene, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Melissa. That was quite the introduction. Thank you. No, it's always exciting to be surrounded by fellow educators and to be in community. So thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you agreed to do it because you've had quite a road to and from burnout. You're now a guide for teachers from burnout to balance through proven wellness practices, including breathwork, mindful movement, habit building strategies, all of this rooted in neuroscience. You focus on simple but powerful shifts that help educators reclaim their time, establish healthy boundaries. My goodness, where were you when I was teaching? And create sustainable habits that lead to greater fulfillment in their personal and professional lives. I really wish I had known you back before I struggled through all that on my own, because you are, in my opinion, the leap that we all need. It's confusing and exhausting to try to have to figure all of this out on your own. So how did you do it?
Yeah.
What's your burnout story? How'd you get where you are now?
Okay, so my story is a complex and quite a long one. So I could start all the way from toddlehood, from childhood. I was born in Jamaica, and I'll try to make this as brief as possible. But I think it's important to know that historically and generationally, that stuff was there right from the beginning, and compounded a little bit more as I got older. But yeah, I fled with my mother from Jamaica from a domestic violence and civil violence situation in Jamaica. So when I was very small, that was already there. We moved to the UK, to England. And I was told, or my family were told, that I actually, had a lot of trauma almost embedded in my body, because when I moved to the UK, the circumstances had led to me stopping walking. I literally just stopped walking. So I'd been walking. I was maybe 2 or 3 years old. And then, I stopped walking. And that was just as a result of the impact of kind of the familial and generational and circumstantial trauma that I experienced, and my family experienced when we were in Jamaica. We continued being in quite a difficult and challenging situation. So we were moving around a lot. I was homeless. My family were homeless. And we went through a lot of really quite acute and chronic stressful situations. Moving from there, I think you build up a sense of resilience. You know how kids are. We kind of just, move through and get on with it. And then after that, my ideal and what I really wanted was to get into teaching. That was something that was really important to me right from the start. I remember as a child really feeling that it was important for me to teach my little sister and to have all of these little lessons at home and, with my dolls and all of that. And I really wanted to impart knowledge, but also have this mutual experience where I felt like my curiosity was being built also. It was a transitional process. So I started off in my first teaching career at school in England, and I was super excited, had a great interview. It was great faculty there, and I was really excited. And then unfortunately, one of the first field trip I went on, so first field trip, first school experience, we wound up in a very, very serious accident. So I was taking my kids, they were only kind of grade 1 age, on a field trip to the library, something really simple. And out of nowhere, as we were walking to the library, a huge vehicle kind of came towards us. It almost felt like I was on a movie set, and it felt like it was in slow motion. And I was there holding my kids' hands, 7-year-old little children on their way to the library, and this car careered into us, landing on top of 2 of my children, and pressing them against the fence of my daughter's high school. So it was just multiple situations there that were just tumultuous and chaotic and traumatizing. And like I say, 2 of my kids were pinned down. Literally, I turned my head around as I'm trying to take care of my other little 7-year-olds at my feet, and I'm injured as well. I'd, injured my coccyx. I'd broken my arm. 2 children across the way, pinned down by this car. I literally could only see their heads, and then just blood surrounding me. And I was fraught. I didn't know how to manage it other than to just, as we do as parents or as teachers, go into this kind of autopilot of trying to make the best in that situation and take care of these babies, my kids that were around me. The result of that accident was that we suffered quite severe and long-standing, injuries, particularly 2 of my students, one that was in a coma for several weeks, one who's, and I don't mean to be too graphic, but it's just the reality of it, is, had to go undergo several skin grafts because his skin was literally taken off his body. And not only was I traumatized by the event, but I think as a teacher, you're traumatized by the fact that you feel that you should have done something differently, and it's your responsibility to make sure everyone's okay. And I remember sat with those children and blood all around us and just feeling this complete guilt that I wasn't able to take care of these kids. And I had a supportive faculty, supportive parents who literally, gave me a standing ovation as I came back to school on my crutches and thanked me for the work and the support I'd done with the kids. But that guilt doesn't leave, and that trauma doesn't leave. And for years on, walking past that place, hearing the noises of cars screeching would just send me into a complete frenzy. So that was a really kind of symbolic moment for me, and I could feel it in my body. I could feel the trauma there as I kind of tried to pursue my career and feeling nervous about field trips and, such like that. So that was the major incident at first. I then moved on to a school in New York where I was a founding teacher, and again underwent some really severe traumatic experiences there. That wasn't, an acute experience. That was more chronic. So it was a daily toxic environment where we were demeaned and demoralized on a daily basis. Our morning meetings would start with the leader of the school telling us that we were all, he could get rid of any of us at a moment's notice. We were all on visas. We'd come from the UK. So that was always hanging over us. We worked a 7-day week, so we did not have any breaks until December. We started in July. So we were not only teaching, but we were health and safety. We furnished and decorated the building. We did marketing on the weekend. It was a school of 33 children, 3 teachers. And so I had a class of 3 grades. I moved classroom that year probably about 5 times as they tried to maneuver and manage the space. And that resulted in eventually in psychiatric hospital. I literally had a breakdown. We were bullied there on a regular basis. We had no voice. We were threatened. And it was just extremely toxic. And when I tried to reach out to human resources and get some support and get some aid, I was, for want of a better phrase, blackballed. And yeah, I was, my visa was revoked and I was asked to leave the country and leave the school. So when I tried to advocate for myself and other teachers, it was a horrific situation. And so, yeah, 3 days in psychiatric hospital, totally burned out at that point, but still had this burning desire to continue teaching. So left there, went to a school in South Korea. Very, very lucky to meet the most amazing leader there, very, very supportive, very emotionally connected. However, unfortunately, there was kind of a takeover in my second year. So although I did really well there and it was a great place to work, very, very supportive, there was a kind of an adjustment as there was a private, it was being taken over privately, and the people that were taken over had no educational experience, no background. It was really based on profit. I was told at that point, even though I'd been promoted to vice principal, they wanted me to step down because they were not comfortable with a Black female face advertising their school. I was disinvited to meetings. I wasn't allowed to be in any of the informational brochures or, any of that stuff. And again, I've got a big mouth. I was trying to advocate for people, and yeah, it was frowned upon. So that led to then the principal, who was amazing, just so disheartened by the process that he left the school mid-year, leaving myself and the other assistant principal running the school, because he just couldn't bear he was burnt out and he couldn't bear to watch the school, fall in the way that it was falling. When he was such a caring and kind man, it was just too difficult for him. So then we ended up in that situation, managing this school. It was my first position as a vice principal. So yeah, we stayed until the end of the year to get everyone through. And I think about 80 to 90% of all faculty left that year. There was mass exodus. And so they almost really had to start the school from scratch. From there, I took a little break, a forced break, I guess, because the immigration process meant that I couldn't work. So I moved back to the States, was waiting for my visa to come through, and then finally got back into the education system in a great school in Atlanta. And then the pandemic hit. And so it was, the pandemic hit. I was going through a divorce. I'd been a survivor from a gun attack. And so it was just, one thing after another. And the pandemic really, I think, threw us completely as educators. And so that's when I retrained in trauma-informed yoga and meditation and mindfulness, started a program called Yoga for Our People, which was a free program for any teachers that were teaching during the pandemic to help support them through the process. And then after doing that for a few months, I left that school at the end of the year and set up my business. And here I am. So yeah, quite the journey.
is definitely quite the journey. I'm going to take us back for just a little bit for my own curiosity. The driver of the car,
Mm.
was this intentional, accidental?
It was accidental. He was under the influence of narcotics, alcohol. He also had a number of loose dogs in the vehicle, which apparently that also contributed to him losing, control of the vehicle. What was really unfortunate, and I think, the legal system is very different in the UK, but my students were not compensated properly for that, which was devastating. One of the students that actually was the most severely injured and was in the coma, when he did finally wake up, he was then under a really intense legal process, to be deported out of the country. So after just surviving that incident, his family then had to go through, the process of potentially being deported, which was horrific, after the psychological trauma and the experience that they had. And then there were some mistakes made along the way in the process. So though we all wanted to be there at the court hearing, they failed to alert us of the correct date. So it went ahead without our testimonies. So yeah, it was tragic.
So after the initial trauma, there was even more that happened
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah.
So when do you feel that you were kind of at the height of your burnout? I mean, clearly, having gone through a breakdown, I part of me says, should I even ask this question? Because that might have been the height. However, you went on to continue to internalize several more events. So what do you think your peak was?
Yeah. I think they all had relevance. I think they were compounded. So it was one thing after another. Definitely the hospital stay was extremely traumatizing. And I wasn't sure after that whether I'd continue in education. That was difficult for a number of reasons. I'm a huge believer in community, particularly in the educational space, because I think sometimes we're isolated in our classrooms and we're isolated just in many different ways. But that felt isolating, not only because I was in this space, in this hospital, that I felt out of control. And initially when I went for help, I didn't expect for that to be made residential. I thought I'd be going home that day, and they wouldn't release me. And so that was really traumatizing. And the fact that I was in New York without my family and my close network of friends, that made it really difficult too. And I think it was also compounded by the fact that I was working really, really hard, as we all were in that school. We all, as all teachers understand, had multiple roles. Like I explained, we were marketing at the weekends. We had numbers of parents come in, and we had to respond to them and answer questions on a Saturday or a Sunday. We were moving furniture and painting classrooms in the evenings, so it was a really difficult environment. And then that was the peak of it. And I think for me, because I'm quite, I'm a very big advocate, and I think voice is super important. And because I've been held down and I wasn't allowed to speak, and I was threatened, my voice was threatened, my experiences were threatened, and undermined, that was really hard for me. That was really, really hard for me. So the hospital was definitely probably a peak. The pandemic was tough too. But I think by the time I'd got to the pandemic, I was so exhausted and hadn't released this stress in a healthy way, that I just literally was crawling on my hands and knees to work daily.
Yeah.
As many teachers are, and I think the problem is, or one of the problems is, that is either considered a badge of honor. It's like, okay, look what I'm doing. I'm exhausted. I have flu. I'm sick. I've just had a loss in my family, but I'm still in the classroom, and that's what's expected of us. And then there's the guilt that aligns with taking any time off, even time off that's owed to you, like, PTO. It's like, well, how are you going to get the class prepared for when you leave? And, it's almost more difficult to be out than it is to be in at times. So I think it was a accumulation of so many things happening. That was definitely a breaking moment for me. Um, I was blessed to go to South Korea with a wonderful team. But then, yeah, I think I was just, by the time it got to the pandemic, I was on empty. I was totally on empty.
Yeah. Which is very common for
Yeah.
burnout, right? And usually empty feels a lot like apathy and depression and
Mm,
anxiety, all, gift wrapped in a gift basket.
yeah.
So we don't always know how to parcel out what's what, and that makes it hard. I'm really appreciating that you said, because I did the same. I do feel like educators often wear these things that contribute to our burnout as badges of honor.
Yeah.
I used to take great pride in the fact that I oftentimes got to school before even the custodian did.
Mm.
And this meant I was waking up at 4 a.m. I
Oh
was
my
getting to
goodness.
school at 5:30 a.m.
Yeah.
He didn't have to be there until 6. And I would brag and say, yes, but this is my quiet time to get all of my work done. School
Mm.
didn't start until 9. So
Wow.
I was coming in and I was working for an additional 4 hours, 3.5 hours every morning. And I wasn't leaving on time.
Mm.
And that's definitely not time I was spending with my family either.
Mm. Mm.
But amongst my teacher friends, I felt proud
Yeah.
that I was doing that, even though it was at the detriment of my own health and the health of my family,
Yeah.
us as a unit.
I totally agree. And there's many teachers and myself included that started off their career like that are continuing to work like that. And you've done half a day's work before the students even arrive at their desks. And, you know, there's just so many things wrong with that. But it's
Yeah.
true. Like I said, I think we're made to feel as if burning out and going above and beyond is just expected of us. And we should be proud of doing that. Um, and that has to change. It's a horrible way to live our lives. It's unhealthy in every way that you can imagine. It embeds itself in your very cells and it takes so long to recover afterwards. And I think because recovery for teachers, again, is something that we normalize. We think that it's normal to have to recover from our jobs. Even just saying
Yeah.
that aloud is ridiculous. Why do we feel that this job we have to recover from? And if we're not recovering, we're not doing it right. That's almost how we feel. Yeah. And then the weekends and the holidays just become that, their recovery. So
Yeah.
we don't even have, well, don't let me get started on people that say we have 6 weeks holidays. But yeah, we don't have real, valuable, switched off, disconnected, disassociated, um, boundaried time. One of the teachers I interviewed recently said, I said, what word describes teaching to you? And she said, unboundaried. And that word just says it all. It's just,
Yeah.
it's too gray. What we do is so gray. It's not distinct. And it needs to change. It really
Well,
does.
for the longest time, teacher, and some places they're still called this, they were called public servants. And I always felt like that was a pretty accurate description,
Hmm.
that we are expected to be servants to the public. And there's also calling us public servants really removes us from the professionals that we are, because
Yeah.
there's a skill set and a talent that goes into teaching that
Yeah.
does not get acknowledged. It is pretty much viewed that anybody can teach. And
Mm,
we know this isn't true. So the
yeah.
profession gets devalued quite frequently in many ways. So I'm curious, so you get into the pandemic, you are a shell at this point.
Yeah.
When did the turnaround happen for you? What was your process in becoming the vital human being that's here with us today?
It was a number of things. Oh, I was getting tired of walking around my school and consoling teachers that were in tears. I was tired of it being normal that when I moved from one space to another, I was likely to be faced with a teacher who was huddled over and crying and feeling desperate and trying to get themselves together to go back and perform in the classroom. That really just sent me crazy. I was like, it's just not normal to be feeling this way and to see your coworkers just feeling challenged and desperate, and demeaned and empty and broken on a daily basis. For me, myself, I was going through at the time a divorce, which was really contentious and challenging, and I was wiped out. And I suddenly just thought, there has to be something different, or this is going to be my path. This has been my path for years. Like, when is this not going to be my path? And I was reading a book, or I was listening to a book on Audible. I was going for a walk, and there was something that in that book, I think, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but
Of course you are.
yourself. Okay. I think it was Unfuck Yourself I was listening to. And there's never a right time to make a change, or to, I had all of these things in my mind. Well, you can't, you know, change your life right now because you're going through a divorce and you were not around your family and your community, and you can't afford to make a shift. And you have, all of these things, but there's never a perfect time, right? So I was like, you're exhausted. You're seeing your school, family, and community around you broken and exhausted. And there has to be a different way to feel like yourself again. I don't know. I didn't know the last time I felt like myself again. I didn't know who I was anymore. At that point, I was literally rolling my suitcase because I was trying to get out of my domestic situation. So I was rolling my suitcase of clothes because on a daily basis, I didn't know where I was sleeping. And I was rolling that into school during the pandemic, teaching, exhausted, and seeing my coworkers broken. And that's the other thing. I think that, and it's not just in teaching, I guess. I think as a society, we tend to kind of isolate and separate our emotions and our experiences. But everybody's going through stuff. And if we can't figure out how to be healthy and how to make good choices, then everything else is just superimposed on that. In your life at home with your family and going through a divorce and financial, challenges or whatever it is. If you're not healthy and resilient and know the tools that you need to create space for yourself and really understand where you're at and how to figure out moving forward, then everything else that life just throws at you just becomes 10 times heavier, and we can't afford it. We have one life. We can't afford to live like that. We just can't.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, I promised myself, I set myself this little goal, and I was doing a little bit of yoga at the time. And I said, okay, if you can commit to 6 weeks of yoga, I think it was, every day, then you can take some money that you've earned and you can pay for a training course that I couldn't really afford, and then move forward with trying to help yourself and others in this situation find sustainable, authentic ways to manage stress and avoid burnout.
Why yoga?
So I'd done a little yoga when I was it's interesting because when I had the accident in the UK, I was told not to do yoga because of the injuries that I sustained. And I was told I should only do Pilates. And I listened to them for months, but it was something that was calling me to yoga for a long time. And so when I got to New York, I was like, okay, I'm going to try this out. And I went to an amazing course run by an amazing yogi. And I remember just the commitment this yogi had to rolling his mat up. And that kind of astounded me that he took so much time getting his space ready. And, when you compare that to a teacher moving frantically around their space without time to pause or reflect, it was just, it's chalk and cheese. It's opposite. And I felt that something that allowed us and instilled this need to pause, to reflect, to take care of yourself and your space with real intricacy, as well as being holistically for your body. So, moving your body in a way that helped you stretch, that helped you loosen up, that helped you be still and be quiet just really appealed to me. So I first trained in vinyasa, and then I was more interested in the trauma-informed kind of style. And so I moved into that directly afterwards.
And so you did your 6 weeks. How did that end? Or, what was that process like for you? 6 weeks of yoga. That was your
Yeah,
commitment.
it was beautiful. I would come home after work every day. It was during the pandemic. We stayed open pretty much. We worked in the school predominantly, and then we did a hybrid model. So I would come home from work and I would force myself, because you know how it is when you come back from school, all you want to do is, well, I did, was eat sugar and starch and wrap myself in bed and watch Netflix. So I would force myself to do this routine. I started with yoga with Adrienne, which most people do when they first start yoga on YouTube. And then I learned and, found other people that, really resonated with me. And I just made sure that I did a movement practice and a meditation practice and a breathwork practice every day for 6 weeks. And I just saw the impact pretty much after about a week, just allowing yourself the space, giving yourself something that is really just for you, and doing it in a way that's conscious. I really believe in conscious, thoughtful yoga. I'm a big advocate that every body is a yoga body. That was my first kind of tagline. It doesn't matter what your abilities are or your experience or your level or your time commitments. Everybody can do yoga, from breathing to, a really heavy, hot vinyasa class and everything in between. So for me, it was about creating and developing something that meant that everybody felt welcome in this space and could use this as one of their tools or modalities for self-care.
So you did your 6 weeks of yoga, and then that encouraged you. You got to reward yourself by taking some
Yeah.
courses.
Yeah.
And so what was kind of lead us to where you're at right now?
Yeah. So I did a few courses, which were awesome. But I also felt, with some of the work that I did and the training I did, first of all, I was really one of maybe only 1% to 2% of people of color in that training space. So that was significant to me. Two, it felt still quite a competitive sport in some regards. And I just wanted to move that into a space that made everybody feel welcome and that was not competition. It was really about getting to know your body. And so then I started my business. I started Yoga Kinship, first of all, because I really predominantly wanted it to be yoga focused. And then and also after I came out of school, I wanted to offer teachers this program on the side, but I wanted my main business to be away from education. To be honest, I felt like I was done. I worked with Spotify, I worked with some legal teams, and I was like, I'm done. I don't ever want to see a classroom again. I'm not interested. I can't do this anymore. And, it's in our heart as educators, we can't stop. So very quickly we came back around, and then started building program and supporting educators. I went back into schools with students as well, which is kind of my love language too, and developing social emotional learning programs, and really creating a program that felt holistic and that felt like it was led by teacher voice. So I did a lot of interviews with teachers and found out exactly what they needed, what worked, what didn't work. And then, Yoga Kinship transformed into kinship education because I felt I had to be back with educators and teachers and students. And so that's what I do now. I design programs. I work, on both levels. I write curriculum, but I also teach daily. So I work at a school for refugee children, Monday to Friday, 8 to 11 with 180 kids. And of course, that's a very trauma fueled environment. So I do a lot of work there on developing capacity and understanding what our emotions are and how we feel those in our body and how we can kind of interrupt the stress cycle using things like yoga and breath work. And I do that with students and with educators. I then became involved with an organization called Whole School Mindfulness. And after a very rigorous year of interview and process, I was granted some funding from them to do some mindfulness work at the school and at other places. So I'm also the mindfulness director at that school too. And yeah, so I'm just trying, because it's ongoing, and I don't think we ever completely recover, maybe. And I think that we have to be prepared. There's this phrase to ride the oscillating waves, and to know that we're, at a peak right now, and then we might come down and things feel good, but life is going to throw something at you. And we need to be able to ride those waves successfully, which is why, I develop these programs that aren't just on the map, but that are hopefully tools that you can take with you throughout the day and throughout your weeks. And in moments when you really need them, they become applicable and useful.
I love that because I think that so many times we think that we can cure burnout or we can cure trauma, and really neither of them can be cured. Burnout is something that we have to keep at bay
Mm.
if we experience stress, and trauma is something that we have to manage. It's not, well, of course, nobody wants to be in a traumatic situation, but
Mm.
once you have experienced one trauma, let alone multiple ones, maintenance has to be done on the soul from that point on
Yeah.
because the damage is already done. But that doesn't mean that we can't love ourselves
Mm.
and stay on that maintenance road where we need to love ourselves maybe a little extra, you know?
Yeah. I totally agree. And I think safety and advocacy for me are at the heart of all this. I think that oftentimes teachers do not feel psychologically, mentally, emotionally safe in their environments. Either that's because they don't feel that they can speak out, they can't advocate for themselves, their roles are so skewed almost. And
Yes.
um, it's very, very difficult to feel safe in an environment like that, even if it isn't, an acute massive kind of trauma or situation that happens. Just that daily sense of being in drudgery and not being heard and feeling uncomfortable to speak out, and stand up for yourself and to create boundaries, they're all traumatizing, ongoing issues, and they lead to burnout as much as, a huge, my car accident or going into hospital. Those daily ongoing issues contribute just as much, I think, to your personal safety and health and well-being. And knowing what you can do. I think one of the beautiful things about yoga is you start to learn who you are. You start to know why your body's responding in the way that it does. And I start each class with my kids after they've done their breath work by saying, how do you feel? And I think we move so quickly, we don't even know how we feel. So, how are we supposed to respond to it? Like, I don't know that I'm sad right now. I don't know that this is making me feel anxious right now. I don't know that I feel super frustrated or tired. And then the next step is, okay, now you know what that is. Like, build in tools that respond to those things so that when you're feeling that way, you don't have to rely on anybody else to fix you. You can figure that out yourself, you know? Um, and that's super important for me from an educator standpoint, and really important for me as tools to give my students, particularly these students who are already coming from kind of traumatized backgrounds and, you know, situations, and the current chaos that's going on around kind of immigration and refugee children.
Yes.
We need these tools. They're vital. They're life changing, you know?
And I think to your point, oftentimes people who are surviving trauma become so used to how that feels
Mm,
that they don't know how to feel anything else. I mean, that's
yes.
their norm. So,
Mm,
so if someone is in the throes of burnout, what would be your advice?
mm. I think, first of all, it's really about acknowledgement. I think it's really hard to accept that or say, like you say, and like we talked about earlier, it's kind of a badge of honor and it's normalized. So I think it's really important to realize and accept and understand that you're going through something really, really difficult. And it's not just okay because you're a teacher, and it's not okay because it's an expectation for us. It's not okay. So the first thing I think really is acknowledging. I think what we also need to do is build community. That is one of the most fundamental things we can do for our sanity and for our health, is to make sure that you have people that you are checking in with and that you're checking in on. So making sure that you have friendships, whether in the school or outside of the school, and relationships that allow you to explore how you're feeling, be a space to vent and to talk and express what's going on. And look for resources within the community. So whether it's yoga classes or it's, somebody that you follow on Instagram or LinkedIn that provide kind of resources and tools for you, get out into the community and figure out ways that you can connect with other people that can support and help you and understand where you are. One of the biggest practical tools I would say to anybody is add movement and breath work to your daily life. Please. There's 3-minute YouTube videos that you can place, you can put on. I put them on for my kids every day. That allows you to just do simple diaphragmatic belly breathing. That's where I'd say everybody should start. So belly breathing is literally place your hands on your belly, breathe in for a count of 4 or 5 seconds, and then exhale for the same count. That's just, belly breath. That will radically change your outlook and your ability to be present, which then allows you to really understand how you're feeling and know what to do about it. Move in whatever way feels comfortable and natural to you. If that means like putting music on and dancing for a few minutes, do that. That's one way to kind of interrupt the stress cycle. To move through yoga, to walk. I know we don't get breaks at schools, but if you do, and when you do get a break, move to a new environment. Get out of your classroom, take a walk, preferably outside. If you can get your feet on the ground and take your shoes off, that's awesome too. There's something called the psychological breath, which we can do when we're really, really stressed out, which is to breathe in for a count of like 3 or 4. And when you get to the top of your breath, breathe in again for another 1 or 2 seconds, and then slowly exhale. Use that to kind of counter any immediate kind of feelings of being stressed and overwhelmed. Seek support of therapy, counseling. That's nothing to be shunned or nothing to be embarrassed about or scared about. If you have that available to you, seek that out. That's going to give you some more tools and modalities. Sleeping is hard, has always been an issue for me, but I would suggest teachers use yoga nidra or body scans at the end of the night to really allow their nervous system to rebalance and to be able to shut off. What I hear, and it was, I do the same thing as a teacher, is because our brains are moving so fast and so quickly, we almost find it uncomfortable to be in silence at the end of the day. We place, we put the TV on, we put music on, which is fine at times. We do things to keep, because it's very, very difficult from an agitated mental state to come down. And that's where body scans are really helpful. I have one that you can get on my LinkedIn page. And there are many that you can just YouTube, like yoga nidra body scans, 10, 15 minutes long. What else am I thinking? Advocate for yourself. If there's something going on in the school that you're uncomfortable or that you don't like, and you firstly advocate for yourself, speak up if you can. And I totally understand if you can't. I've been in that situation too. Record things that are going on, keep a record and keep a track of information and stuff that's happened. That was to my detriment in one of the situations that I was in, because I didn't have the evidence accessible to me that I should have had. So keep copies of things, record stuff, and prepare yourself for your exit if that's what it comes to. Your health is super important. If that means you need to take 3 months to gather your stuff together and start saving and having conversations with your family and looking elsewhere, sometimes it's really difficult. I hear so many teachers say, I'm so unhappy and burned out in this place, but I don't have the energy to look for something else. So we have to kind of prioritize that. Remove things, and instead of a to-do list, have a to-don't list. What are you not going to do today? What are you going to exchange for something that you would do? And also the school and the kids and everyone is going to be fine if you don't do something perfectly that day. If your lesson goes to shit or hell in a handbasket, if you need to spend some time just breathing with your kids, talking to them, do that, find a way during your week where you're not completely switched on fully, because that is a recipe for burnout. So they're the quick suggestions I would give. Yeah.
To your point, we as teachers, we're teaching our students to be this way as well.
Right.
So if we can teach them how to shut off for a bit by us modeling that, everybody wins.
Absolutely.
So we are fortunate enough that you have put together a program. So anybody out there that is listening and is thinking, this lady's got my number. I mean, that would have been me. And I did. Part of your advice was, I thought, this is always going to be too much for me. And I came up with an exit strategy. Not everybody can do that. And I understand that. But tell us a little bit about your program, because I think that it's very beneficial for the people who are using it. And, hopefully somebody out there listening will say, hey, this is me and I need Diestene.
Thank you. So, one of the things that I like to do, and I want to put that out there first, is just I have a lot of free resources anyway. So I have boundary scripts, and I have kind of breath work and yoga nidra, and I also run some classes for free during the year. So please check me out, and I'll give you all of my information later. But if it's something that you just want to grab something quick, there's resources that I build and have available to you guys. So please take advantage of those. The program I'm really excited for, because I have been working on this and developing it in this form for months and months and months, interviewing so many teachers and figuring out what they need, what's worked for them, what doesn't work for them. Because the last thing I wanted to do as an educator is something that's done to us a lot of times, is to have this top-down approach and we're told what's best for us. And I really wanted to create something that was best for teachers, So what came out of that really was that community is really important. Coaching and support and mentorship is really important. Simple, like science-backed tools are really important that we can use quickly in like 15 minutes time. And creating a space to talk about our experiences and be supported by like-minded people who know what's going on. So I've tried to put all of that together, and it's a kind of online coaching / well-being program. It includes breath work. It includes body work, so somatic practices, just like body scans, but also stretching and gentle restorative yoga. But predominantly, it's about creating long-term sustainable tools that we can use for the rest of our lives, whatever space we're in, to ensure that we can acknowledge and notice when we're not feeling great, and do something about it. So some of the things it's going to include, we're going to learn about what burnout actually is, what trauma is, and kind of put some theory behind that and science behind that, so that we really understand and can recognize when we're in that space. We're going to be doing a lot of work on the nervous system. So as you know, our nervous systems are really out of whack and imbalanced, which leads to like chronic stress, lack of sleep, apathy, disconnection with the people that we love, and all of these things. And so we're going to be working on rebalancing our nervous system and what that looks like in terms of reprogramming the way that we are, and knowing when we're in fight or flight, and how to reduce that and get back to a space of kind of safety and clarity. We're going to be looking at self-doubt and self-criticism, because that's something that came up time and time and time again. Teachers are perfectionists and we are never ever doing it well enough. And I think that all I kept hearing from teachers is, I just want to feel like I'm doing enough and that I'm good enough. And it doesn't matter how many times we're told that. I think it's almost ingrained in us. I don't know what the training process is for teachers in the US, but I know it's the fundamental kind of rock stone for teacher training in the UK is self-reflective practices. Basically, all that means is someone to keep telling you that you could do it better. You're constantly like, how could that planning have been better? How could my behavior management be better? How could I reach that child a little bit better? How could I have responded to that? How could I have managed my time better? So we're always being told we're not good enough. And then, we wonder why we're constantly criticizing ourselves and feeling like what we are doing isn't working or isn't good enough, and that's all the way from newly qualified teachers who've just stepped in the classroom to teachers I know that have been teaching for 35, 40 years that still feel they have not got it right and they're not doing enough. So a lot of the work we're going to be doing is coaching around self-critical talk and how we kind of disparage that and how we move to reframing our mindsets so that we're not in this kind of critical space, which is super damaging for our brain. And it almost, does rewire us for really negative talk. We're going to be doing a lot on time and energy management, which is really about creating boundaries and knowing what we need to prioritize and things that we can let go and let slip. Like I said before, the to-don't lists and the ways that we need to kind of close down our time and make more time for the things that we love and that make us who we are, with our families and just bringing joy back into our lives. We're going to be thinking about rituals, and so how we actually keep the wellness practices sustainable in small bursts throughout the day and through the week so that we can kind of build on this routine of wellness and self-care. And we're going to be looking into restorative practices. So what we do when we're completely out and exhausted and how we kind of pick ourselves back up. So the process is going to be over 6 to 8 weeks. It's all online. It's a combination of all of those things. It's also teacher-led and teacher-driven. So we'll figure out as we go along what might be helpful for the cohort. It's the beta program coming up in March or maybe April. So it's only going to be 10 of us this time as we work these things out together. And I'm really, really excited for it. I'm really, really excited for it. I think that, I've done things like this on a smaller scale, and I've done wellness programs for teachers, and it's always been really well received and feels like it's making, real changes. And that's what I want to do. So this is kind of an expanded version of that.
I think this is amazing. All of Diestene's information and links are going to be in today's show notes. And I will update as you get stuff finished up too, so that anybody that comes and listens to this knows how to get hooked up with what you're doing. Because I think the people that are listening, they're the people who either have overcome burnout themselves or they are people who are still there. So any resources are good at this point.
I'd love to send you everything. And I'm on LinkedIn is my kind of social media of choice. Diestene Williams on there, and I put out tools every day on there and share some resources on there. I do free discovery calls, so you can just email me or send me a message and we can talk about what might work from you, all the way from the program to just some kind of free resources that I might be able to share with you. Or just, I've had teachers just contact me and say that they just need to scream and vent for 20 minutes, and that's cool too. So yeah.
Free therapy. Yeah.
Yes. So I'd love to build community, and for anyone out there that feels that this resonates, wants to connect with me, I would be excited to talk to you.
I so appreciate you coming on the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we end today?
No, I think we've covered a lot, right?
We did.
And as you'll see that I have no filter. This is why I've been, this is why I was removed from my school in New York and ended up in South Korea. But yeah, I'm a very, my story for me is important because I think many of us feel that we are alone in our experiences. And when we realize that we're not, that's life-changing too.
And it's okay to be a boat rocker.
It is. I can't do anything but.
And that's okay. We need some people to rock these boats. I tend to be one myself. I think we find each other. I had a feeling.
Yeah. I had a feeling we were kindred spirits in that way. So yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
I wish I knew.
Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is by Otis McDonald featuring Joni Inez. If you know someone who might enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast episodes as much and as often as you can. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access today's episode and sending it in a message or sharing it on social media. I'm a small independent operation, and your shares broaden our audience. Perhaps you or someone you know will be inspired to talk about teacher burnout. If you would like to get your voice on my podcast, contact me via the link on my webpage, taught.buzzsprout.com. Coach, speaker, and author Rashid Ogunlaru said, "It may take many voices for people to hear the same message." Join me in being one of the many voices rising up to get the message out around educator burnout. This is Melissa LaFleur. Thank you for listening to Taught, the podcast.
I wish I knew.
I have an important reminder/disclaimer to share. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Content provided on this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be taken as professional advice. We encourage you to do your own research and consult with qualified professionals before making any decisions based on the information discussed in this or any other episode. Additionally, any opinions or statements made during the podcast are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, or individual. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you for tuning in,